So I'm going to bring to the stage Don McPherson. He's a college football Hall of Famer, second in the Heisman Trophy voting in 1987. He played professional football and is now one of the leading voices as a male feminist in all areas, especially on college campuses. My friend and mentor, Don McPherson.
Good afternoon. How you doing? Everybody feeling good? All right, good. I have about 10 minutes to go on a little bit of a rant. And then Joe and Jan and Ray are going to join me on the stage, and we're going to have a little panel discussion about sports and masculinity, and then eventually we'll get to that title. Let me just tell you really quickly of who I am so you have a little bit of context about where I come from and the perspective of the work that I do, that I did at SMU for Dale several years ago. I'm from New York. I'm the youngest of 5. I grew up in a sports family. I had my oldest brother played for the San Diego Chargers, now runs a mega church down in San Diego. If anyone has ever heard of The Rock, San Diego, that's my brother Miles. I had another brother at the same time that Miles was at the San Diego Chargers, ranked 2nd in the world as a middleweight fighter. And at that time, I was at Syracuse University playing football. And so I grew up around sports, and I love sports. I take that back. I love when people compete and enjoy competing against one another. And what sports has become is something very different, and I'm going to get to that in a moment. As Dale mentioned, I was inducted into the college. I'm wearing my Hall of Fame ring, College Football Hall of Fame ring, because earlier this week I emceed a dinner in New York City I'm on the National Football Foundation New York City chapter of the College Football Hall of Fame and the New York City chapter, and we had honored a bunch of high school scholar athletes on Tuesday night in New York. And so whenever my ring leaves the house, I keep it on, so I don't normally wear it. But I'm also involved with ESPN and other networks covering college football. I vote on a number of college football awards. I'm heavily involved in the sport of college football. It's the only sport I really watch and care about. I'm also a feminist and an activist in the prevention of all forms of men's violence against women. I've served on the board of the Men's Foundation for Women, on the U.S. National Committee for UN Women, and currently sit on the task force with the NCAA on sexual violence on college campuses. And I've been doing this work on college campuses for about 22 years. I'll get into that in a moment. But my conversation around masculinity comes from the work to prevent men's violence against women. And in doing so, I had to challenge how I was raised. So coming from a sports background and coming from the world of sports my entire life, I had to look at the issue of masculinity and men's violence against women from that perspective. And so even before I started doing work around men's violence against women in 1994, even before I started doing that work, I was already doing work using sports as a platform to talk to young people about social issues. And I came to the conclusion about where sports was going, and I taught a class called Sport and Civility at Adelphi University back in the early 90s. And I would always ask the class, how many of you think sports are good for kids? And every hand in the class would go up. And it was, and I had a lot of non-traditional students who were coming back to go back into the profession of coaching. And then I would tell them that I think sports has become a cancer in our culture. And they would look at me with jaws dropped. Here's the former athlete telling us that, and we all want to be coaches and physical educators, and he's saying that sports is a cancer in our culture. And I started challenging them. If you do not proactively teach the things that we think sports is all about, the altruism of sports, it doesn't teach. When I was playing, I was not a great guy. I was the most egomaniacal, right? Egotistical, egomaniacal person you could meet. I win, you lose. That's it. And if you think about where sports is in our culture, it doesn't teach all those, it doesn't represent all those altruistic things that we think it does. Even if you look, and we don't care that it does. There was a time when it was the myth that athletes were great people. We just didn't know who they were. And now that we know who they are, we don't care. So a year ago, 2 years ago, I'm gonna give you this is my little bit of my rant part. Because I'm affiliated with the NFL because I played in the NFL. I'm still very close to the game of football. 2 years ago, we had Jameis Winston, whose DNA was in a rape kit, who was a thief, who was suspended for a game for standing on a table in his school saying, fuck her in the pussy, fuck her in the pussy. Pardon my language, but this is what happened. This is the individual we're talking about. He did those things, he stole and did that thing after he was charged with a sexual assault. After his DNA was in a rape kit. And the NFL said they're going to clean up the act. Jameis Winston played in the NFL's Pro Bowl last year. Or this year, just a couple months ago. Then there was Richie Incognito. Remember Richie Incognito, the white guy from the Miami Dolphins who was bullying Jonathan Martin, the very fine young man from Stanford University, was calling Jonathan Martin a punk-ass nigger. The white guy calling the black guy in the NFL a punk-ass nigger. Richie Incognito played in the Pro Bowl this year. We don't care. What are our young people looking at when they see that? And so when I first started saying that sports is a cancer, it was because of the automatic assumptions that sports automatically does something good without checking what that is. Because the larger culture has something to say about the role of sports in our society. Then I started doing work around men's violence against women. And I went to Northeastern University thinking I was going to be doing work primarily around racism in sports. And then I met a guy named Jackson Katz. Some of you may be familiar with Jackson's work. And Jackson blew my mind because he exposed my privilege. And I always say, and exposed the detriment of masculinity on my life. And I always say to people that my gender has had a more adverse impact on my life than my race. And it's funny because white people go, "But you're black. What could be worse than that?" Right? But then I had to start breaking down how I learned what it meant to be a man, because that's the work that we were doing around masculinity and men's violence against women. And then I came to that place where I had to really be honest about how I learned what it meant to be a man and when did I learn it. And I had to ask, and I ask this question to men all the time, and I won't do this right now, but for purpose of time, but I asked men, what was the worst insult you could hear as a little boy? You throw like a girl.